Dennis Newman serves as Amtrak's Executive Vice President of Planning and Asset Development. He oversees network, fleet, and infrastructure planning, stations, facilities, properties, and accessibility, infrastructure access and investment, the Host Railroads Group, and Amtrak's Gateway Program team, which is working in concert with the Gateway Development Corporation and our partners to advance this critical infrastructure work linking New York and New Jersey. Dennis joined Amtrak in December 2017 and served as Vice President, Schedule and Consist Planning, refining train schedules and capacity deployments to improve ridership, revenue, and the financial and operating performance of Amtrak's routes. His experience includes 17 years in the airline industry at Northwest Airlines and Delta Airlines. At Northwest, Dennis held roles of increasing responsibility in network planning and scheduling, marketing coordination, and financial planning and analysis, ultimately serving as Vice President, North America Network Planning. After Northwest merged with Delta, he served as Vice President, International Network Planning for Delta. Areas of expertise include strategic planning, network development, demand forecasting, and profitability analysis. Immediately prior to joining Amtrak, Dennis worked in the telecommunications industry at Dish Network, serving as Vice President in-home services, then as Vice President sales. He began his career as an information systems development consultant. Dennis graduated from Princeton University with a Bachelor of Science in Engineering, majoring in electrical engineering and computer science. He also holds a Master of Business Administration degree from the Tuck School at Dartmouth College. Please welcome Dennis Newman.
Well, Dr. Green, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Sorry, I gave you kind of the long form of my intro, my bio there. So thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good morning to everyone, depending on where you are. I'm very glad to be here. I want to thank Dr. Green and all the organizers and the audience for giving me the opportunity to talk to all of you about the opportunities for passenger rail growth. And let me get my presentation pulled up here and make sure that everybody can see it. Very good. All right, well, thank you. So, it might seem a little bit strange to be talking about passenger rail growth in the environment that we're in right now. We've obviously got very reduced service in the pandemic that we're in, severely reduced ridership for sure. We've got challenges attracting folks. You'll see the pictures in this presentation are pre-COVID pictures. If you saw pictures of what's going on right now, of course, everybody'd be wearing a mask, and that's one of the important aspects of getting people back riding. So yeah, it's an interesting time to talk about passenger rail growth. But on the other hand, as Dr. Green mentioned, I did spend a long time in the airline business, and I was in the airline business for 9/11. And that in that situation, we were in similarly, it was such a shock, and you thought, okay, well, traffic's never going to come back. Things are going to be absolutely different, and things were different, and it did take a while, but nevertheless, the traffic did eventually come back, and so there are some underlying trends that I think are favorable to passenger rail growth. That once we get past the environment that we're in right now, I think will reassert themselves and will begin to present those opportunities again. All right, so 4 parts that I'd like to talk to all of you about today. So one is to say the statutory mandate here is what is it that Congress tells us to do on behalf of the American people? Second, I want to talk a little bit about our vision for the future and where we see the opportunity for passenger rail. Talk about some of the challenges to delivering the growth, and then also talk about the path forward and how we address those challenges. So first, a little bit of history. So, going back 50 years, rail passenger traffic had obviously diminished some, and it was a drain financially on the railroads. So, as pointed out here, Amtrak was created to relieve some of that financial pressure and the obligation for the railroads to operate passenger trains. Now, as noted here, there were two critical conditions that went along with that, and one is that Amtrak would continue to have access to the railroad's lines so that passenger service could be sustained, and also that Amtrak trains would have preference over freight transportation. Now, this is, of course, critical to our success because, the vast majority of our train miles are operated over the freight railroads. So these two conditions are very important to us and are a key part of our potential success. So, in getting to kind of, right down to it, what we're supposed to do, I mean, it's kind of right there in the code. So in 49 US code, so the mission of Amtrak is that we're to provide efficient and effective intercity passenger rail mobility. Another key aspect is for it to be trip time competitive. And as pointed with the other intercity travel options, as pointed out here, there are some other goals. So one of them is to operate to all station stops within 15 minutes to the maximum extent feasible. So on-time performance is really critical to us because it's very important to our passengers. We also have the goal to develop transportation on more rail corridors. So as noted here, particularly subsidized by the states. And that we should implement schedules that, in order to have that trip time competitiveness, would try to have a system-wide average speed of 60 miles an hour. And that is a bar that we definitely have some struggles to be able to attain. But those are all really components of us being able to operate a comprehensive and a reliable intercity passenger rail network. So, talking about those two conditions again, about the access and preference and how they're supposed to work. We obviously, as pointed out, we make our agreements with the rail carriers to use their rail lines, and those can include a penalty for untimely performance. And to the extent that we've got a challenge in being able to get our access to the rail lines, then there's a mechanism to apply to the Surface Transportation Board so that we can ensure that access does get granted. Now, on the preference side, what the law calls for is that the passenger transportation provided by Amtrak has preference over freight transportation. Now, a rail carrier could apply to the STB for relief if providing the preference is going to materially, as it says, materially lessen the quality of freight transportation. Nobody has ever actually taken advantage of that provision. And then one of the key things is that the ability to actually enforce the preference is only vested in the Attorney General in the Department of Justice. So that's kind of the table stakes for for the starting of what Amtrak is supposed to be about, what we're supposed to be producing for the people. But what I'd like to turn to now is to talk a little bit about where we see that mission going in the future, and where that could possibly take us. So, the title of our webinar here today was is rail industry growth for increased long-term profitability? And as I'm sure all of you know, Amtrak hasn't exactly had a history of profitability. But as this slide illustrates, in the last several years, with a lot of hard work and focusing on safety, modernizing and upgrading our product, working to increase our ridership and increasing our cost efficiency as well, we actually were, in this fiscal year, we're on the verge of a positive adjusted operating earnings, which is our typical measure. In 2019, as pointed out here, we had record revenue, strong ridership. We had our best ever operating performance. We were certainly, through the first 5 months of this year, we were actually going to well outperform our plan to hit a break-even net operating result. So there are trends that, in our view, were underlying some of that performance. So it wasn't just what we're doing, but also trends in the country that were helping to propel us in that direction. That, again, we certainly today have got to get past the challenge of the pandemic and its effects on our traffic, but we do think those trends will help drive us forward as we do get past that situation. So here's a look at our current route network. And if we were to overlay the 1971 route network on top of this map, it really would lay on top of it pretty nicely. It would not look wildly different. Certainly some differences, but really it's relatively little unchanged in almost 50 years. Definitely some significant adds and a few subtractions along the way. But during that time, the population of the country has increased by about 60%. So there are a lot more people as potential customers for us to move around. Now, obviously, population growth by itself is not the sole determinant of whether we're going to have passenger traffic. Obviously, the country was bigger in 1970 than it had been long before, and yet, as we talked about earlier, passenger rail was a financial drag on the railroads. So population growth by itself doesn't mean that passenger rail is going to flourish. Clearly, other modes have influence. Those modes that we need to be trip time competitive with are going to have an impact on whether passenger rail is going to be successful. Growth of the highway system certainly had a big impact. The growth of air transportation and its flourishing has certainly had an impact. And those impacts continue, but there are some changes in where those trends are leading that I think open up some more opportunities for us on the providing passenger rail. So anybody who drives around in a metro area knows that with population growth, our highways do see a good amount of congestion. Again, this is one of those things that's impacted in the current environment. On the one hand, a lot more people working from home, so that's reducing the traffic. On the other hand, for short range commuting on transit systems, there are a number of people who are taking their cars instead if they are moving. So that kind of cuts both ways. But but underlying the growth of our major urban areas has created a good bit of traffic congestion. You could see the red dots here from this map from USDOT, pointing out places that in 2012 were highly congested. And then the projection that the DOT had for 2045 showed a real uptick in the amount of congestion that could be expected. Now, again, the current environment with people making changes in their movement, to the extent that it's going to have a more lasting impact, is going to have an impact on what kind of congestion we're going to see on the highways. But nevertheless, we would still expect to see growth in population, and again, if you take the more optimistic view, as we get past the current situation, more of the long-term trends are likely to start to reassert themselves, and we will see growth. So as much as there'd still be, that obviously this is pointing out a need for construction, keeping up with that growth and keeping up with the congestion is going to be a challenge. So, the other thing that you see here is this projection, whereas in the previous chart, that the red spots were kind of confined to metro areas. In this projection, you'd see it actually extending more to the path between different metro areas. And that's notable for what impact that could have for intercity passenger rail, because that's really where the opportunity for passenger rail, intercity passenger rail, presents itself. And to the extent that congestion becomes more problematic and the trip times get longer if you need to drive, that's going to make the rail alternative more attractive. At the same time, as much as airline growth and the air industry increases over the last several decades, as well as over the long term declines in real yields for airlines, so that more people were able to travel and airlines got better at filling their airplanes, has taken a lot of people into air travel. Over the last couple decades, there has been a bit of a shift for the airlines away from shorter haul flights, with more focus on the longer haul flights. And that's been exacerbated, of course, by the security that came after 9/11. And for those shorter trips, the issue kind of becomes a bit of a fixed time cost for your trip, that makes rail relatively more competitive. If you've got to allow your time to get to the airport, your time to get through security, be able to be at the gate, some extra time before they're going to board, because they'll start boarding 40 minutes ahead. You've got a couple hours baked into just getting to the plane. If you're only going to travel a few hundred miles, then those couple hours make a big difference. And then particularly if when you get to the other side, you're going to have to travel to get to your real destination, you got even more of a time penalty with taking that short haul flight. So, and that particularly is going to be important if your real destination happens to be a downtown. And that's where passenger rail can really have an impact, because we've got generally going to have the ability to get people to those city centers. So, there's been a very significant decrease in those shorter haul flights. And here in the advent of COVID, we've actually seen even more reductions for some of those communities that are generally served by shorter haul flights. And that makes an opportunity for passenger rail to, as I said, be more competitive, and have an increasing possibility to pick up traffic. So the other, just kind of continuing on that theme, we've really seen in the population growth that's gone on in the last several decades in the country, a big growth in metro areas, such that, particularly in the South and the West, so that they kind of start to merge together into what are termed the mega regions. So this again really presents a good opportunity for passenger rail, because connecting up those metros within the major region, those mega regions, is what passenger rail's got a, a real advantage in providing. You can actually serve a good number of city pairs because you're connecting cities along the way. It's not just the end to end. And if it happens to be, particularly based on the sort of density in that city, to the extent that the metro area has a concentration of both residents and businesses downtown, it even more lends itself to to passenger rail being a good solution. Certainly, the places that are more spread out, a little bit more of a challenge. But even then, the fact that you would have stops along the way lets you pick up people where they are, where they live, where they want to be. So that this kind of, each of these mega regions really presents an opportunity. And so to the extent that these regions are a potential for intercity passenger rail, here, this lets us take a look at, well, okay, to what extent, how well are we actually serving and taking advantage of that potential for growth? So this chart probably needs a little bit of explanation here, because there's a lot going on. Basically, it is showing, though, that there's many of these growth markets are very much underserved relative to their potential. So that the size of the circles is just pointing out, it's relatively how big is the metro area. So, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, they've got the biggest circles. And then the color coding is giving an indication of what kind of change those areas have seen in population over the last roughly 50 years. So you can see those, pretty good sized circles in the south and west are all or mostly green, showing that there's been very, very significant growth in the population in those areas. And then the lines are showing the Amtrak route map, with the increasing thickness and darkness showing to what extent there is frequency serving those markets. So you can see that in the Northeast, with our Northeast Corridor service, where there's the biggest population density of big cities close together, that's the one place where we've really got a lot of frequency, and so providing a good bit of service and a well-served market. We also have got in California, our services in Capitol Corridor and the San Joaquins and Pacific Surfliner have got some pretty good frequency serving those markets as well. And then the Hiawatha service between Milwaukee and Chicago. The kind of lighter blue lines show our other areas where we've got multiple frequencies, and so there is a good, decent amount of passenger utility that's produced there. But many of these places, some of the biggest, in fact, Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, Atlanta, for passenger rail service, there is maybe one train a day each way, maybe less, actually less today with the pandemic, but in normal times, a single train going each way. And some places, even with those trains going through, they're not there in daylight hours. So, we have two of our long distance trains go through Cleveland, but neither one of them goes through during the day when you could really be providing a good bit of utility for customers to attract them to our service. So each of those dots, particularly the ones that are in proximity to each other by a few hundred miles, are the kinds of places that represent opportunities to us, and that we are doing our evaluation, and we see some good potential for passenger rail to to grow in the future. Obviously, the Northeast Corridor is really the kind of the model, as I talked about. I mean, that's where we've got a significant amount of population density close together, and a lot of service capability of providing high-speed service. You know, there really aren't a lot of other places in the country that are exactly like, well, there's no place that's exactly like the Northeast Corridor. But there are some that, and the ones that are most like it are the places where we see the opportunity. And as noted here, you know, in Texas, the big cities there that are relatively close to each other, where we could actually see having trip time competitive service, are growing to a population where they would start to look more like the kind of density that we see in the Northeast Corridor. But there are some other places where we've got, similarly, we've got some dense population centers that are close together, and that are successfully operating with multiple frequencies in normal times, again, providing that passenger utility that really produces a good bit of ridership. So the Hiawatha service between Chicago and Milwaukee, very competitive with you know, with road transportation, carries almost 900,000 passengers a year, and does so with good operating performance. Similarly, another example, the Capital Corridor service in Northern California. You know, we have got multiple frequencies a day, so there's a lot of passenger utility, 14 round trips in normal times, 1.8 million passengers in normal times. Another example of a relatively set of good population density, relatively proximate to each other, so that it can be a good opportunity for passenger rail. You know, the other thing that, the other underlying trend that we think really makes a passenger rail growth attractive is the, you know, is an appreciation for energy efficiency, and particularly related to its impact on climate. And there was little discussion, I know, at the end of the prior presentation about that attractiveness. So it certainly drives more interest among younger demographic for passenger rail, and rail does really, and passenger rail does represent a very efficient and, you know, and green relative to other modes of transportation opportunity. And we think with growing appreciation for that aspect of passenger rail, that's going to continue to be a driver for more demand for us. So, so we think there's a good opportunity out there, again, that will reassert itself as we for the longer term, and that was one of the other key phrases in the title for our webinar today is long-term profitability. So we see a good opportunity, but there are challenges to us getting there. As I said, getting past COVID is the first one, but there also are some areas where policy could address what some of those challenges. So, you know, for these places where we're going to look to grow, we certainly see growth on the Northeast Corridor where we own the railroad, but the vast majority of the country is going to, if we're going to have growth in passenger rail, that growth is going to take place on freight railroads. So to do that, you know, we talked about access and preference and on time, and those are the things that we really need to have to be successful. So our process for being able to expand service, and our ability to get our passengers there on time are going to be key requirements for success. So, one of the challenges, as exemplified by the Gulf Coast, is after Hurricane Katrina, the service between on the Sunset Limited that had gone Orlando to New Orleans and on to the West Coast, the New Orleans to Orlando portion was suspended. And in trying to get that service back, it ended up being a very, very long effort and really not successful. Now, currently, there's ongoing effort to have a portion of that route be reestablished between New Orleans and Mobile, and and that we've actually got some progress there, and are hopeful that that's going to come to pass. But the challenge with actually getting our access is a continued one. And then in terms of the preference for passenger rail over freight, which, as we talked about at the beginning, is part of the statute. The only way to actually enforce that preference, as I mentioned, is from the Department of Justice. And this article right here is pointing out the one time that DOJ actually has sought to enforce Amtrak's preference rights over the course of our history. So it is generally a challenge because, frankly, there are many times when we encounter not getting the preference that is called for. And this is the only mechanism that is available to enforce it. And that on time is very important to our to passengers. This is just pointing out some of the variability that we see in our on-time performance. And distance has something to do with this, obviously. But our long-distance passengers, 58% of them get there late, and they can often get there, quite late. And similarly, even on our state-supported routes, we have got challenges with getting our passengers there on time. Clearly, we're not perfect on the corridor either, but on the Northeast Corridor, we are able to produce quite good on-time performance. And it is this indicates sort of, part of why that is so important. When this graphic is showing the correlation between on-time performance, so these would be instances of what percent we are on time along the x-axis in a given month on a route, and then what our customer satisfaction index score for that route in that same month is on the y-axis. And you could see they are very much directly correlated. And so when we're on time, customers end up being more satisfied. There are all kinds of aspects of the trip and other reasons why customers may or may not be satisfied with their service, but when they're late, it tends to have some impact on all of those aspects and facets of their experience. So if there's one thing that correlates really strongly with how well customers are satisfied with their trip, it's did they get there on time. And that actually can translate into some significant financial impacts on Amtrak. I mean, and you saw what kind of, the numbers for Amtrak when I was talking about our improvements in profitability. These kinds of figures are pretty big dollars for Amtrak, for a company our size. What this is showing is a study that the DOT's Inspector General did a while back, but it gives one estimate of what the effects and what the opportunity is for real financial return from having better on-time performance. So their estimates saw that the with that kind of customer satisfaction that comes along with on-time performance, the increase in ridership and revenue could drive, upwards of $100 million of revenue annually. And then similarly with cost savings from areas like labor and fuel, we could see additional positive impact. And we do have in our contracts with our host railroads, we do have performance payments. If we got better on-time performance, we of course would pay more for that. So there's an offset to the better on-time performance. But you can see with this one estimate of what getting to 85% on-time performance could do, it's a very substantial financial impact on our overall operating performance. And just an example to see the correlation of on-time and ridership. This is just looking at one of our routes over the last decade, and what kind of correlation you see between on-time performance and ridership, and it's very closely correlated here on the Illini and Saluki. So in terms of the path forward, what are some of the needed policies and actions that we think could help make that growth take place? Well, there's a few things. I mean, one, having collaboration between us and our host railroad partners is the first, and that's a key. Being able to have enforcement of on-time performance. And then also having a mechanism to make sure that access and preference that we've talked about a few times take place. So, one place where you could see the kind of collaboration and what could be possible is some partnership between the Commonwealth of Virginia and CSX in the deal that they are putting in place. To be able to expand service through Virginia, and that's going to have the benefits of increasing both intercity passenger service as well as commuter service, and that kind of cooperative interplay is something that can work very well and can be a win-win and produce a good increase in passenger revenue. And obviously our service with Virginia that runs and connects to the Northeast Corridor is one of the examples of a place where we've got corridor service that is very successful and has got good opportunity to be able to expand. We also cooperate with a number of the freight railroads on going after joint grant opportunities to be able to improve the rail, improve the routes that we're operating over, and produce benefits for the passenger rail transportation, and also serves to benefit the host as well. So you're looking for those kinds of opportunities to obtain funding and work together to make improvements is one of the key things that can help with fostering passenger rail growth going forward. So in terms of the on-time performance standard, the reason why we've seen a need for some sort of standard to be established is that over time, as there has been more emphasis on a standard and emphasis on enforcement, we've seen on-time performance tick up. So when PREA came into effect and there were on-time performance requirements promulgated, we saw increases in on-time performance. As there were challenges, we've seen decreases. Going way back, you can see when there was a preference enforcement by DOJ, you saw increases in on-time performance. So kind of having that that monitor, that standard in place for what kind of on-time performance is expected and needs to be, frankly, delivered for the benefit of the traveling public. um, really does, I think, help to produce the focus that's needed to get that kind of passenger rail and on-time performance. And the other thing is that the process in terms of access to grow it ends up, the process is very often long and can be dragged out. And I think that certainly we see opportunity to simplify, clarify the process for Amtrak getting additional train service onto host railroads is needed. And so the House recently passed legislation. Obviously, it's not it needs to pass both houses and get through the whole process. But the Moving Forward Act that was passed by the House does put some clarifying language in place and tries to get an expedited process for access, so that as we try to pursue those opportunities for passenger growth and bring more mobility options to more people, that can happen faster and more expeditiously. Similarly, as we talked about, the preference enforcement with only the DOJ being able to bring it doesn't really end up being enforced very often. So both houses have actually passed legislation that would give Amtrak a right to enforce preference. And that would give us an opportunity to, since obviously we've got a little bit more interest than and are closer to it than the DOJ, have ability to, to make our case for that preference enforcement. So, those aspects of policy are things that we see as being very important to being able to take advantage of opportunities that we think are going to be out there. But there's a number of things that we need to do as well. First step for us, obviously, is to get passengers back traveling, and that's why we're taking key steps to improve add more features in the wake of COVID to make people feel good about their health and safety while they're traveling. We've got increased cleaning procedures. We've got the mask wearing requirements. We're partnering with a number of academic institutions, as well as Lyles, you may have seen, to make sure that we are doing the best, everything we can to make people feel good about getting back on the trains. So we've got a good bit of marketing to do to get people traveling more. But at the same time, there's also investment and work that we need to do in concert with others to continue to make our product more attractive. So modernizing our fleet, improving our stations, and seeking out the funding for the infrastructure investments that we need are a key part of that. So we've had, and we continue to have, a lot going on bringing our fleet up to date. So on the Northeast Corridor, we'll have new Acela train sets coming starting next year. We've been taking delivery of a number of new sleepers and diners that we use on our long distance service. We've got replacement locomotives coming, starting, they'll be coming next year. Our state partners in California and the Midwest are taking delivery of new passenger cars. And we are currently working on a procurement for new intercity train sets that will replace some of our aging fleet, both on the Northeast Corridor and in our state corridors. So getting our fleet modernized is something that we've got to do to help grow passenger rail, and we are very much involved in it. Similarly, to have passengers be attracted and to have a great experience when they're traveling on Amtrak, improving our stations is one of the other things we're investing in quite a bit and paying a lot of attention to. And that includes our big major stations, as well as individual stations all around the national network, particularly making a lot of good improvements on accessibility, but also just having the state of good repair of our stations be brought up to snuff. And knowing that both on our railroad and on the railroads where we want to be able to grow and have our access, we do need funding for making the investments in capacity that are needed. And so having, this is the other policy piece, having the federal government, having Congress be providing more funding for Amtrak and for rail in general is critical. And so the House's Invest in America Act has got a good bit of significant funding for passenger rail in it, and including a good bit for Amtrak. And so that's obviously very important, so that, as I said, the capacity enhancements that are needed in order to accommodate and foster passenger rail growth can be made. And if we can do that, we have got a great opportunity, again, as we get past the current COVID situation, for I think a very bright future for passenger rail. There's the demographics are out there to where in the right places where there is a good opportunity for passenger rail to be very successful. So with that, I want to thank all of you for your time and your attention. And I think I got a couple minutes before the end of the hour.
Any questions out there for Dennis?
It's Jim Blaze, but I don't want to hog, so I'm going to wait until somebody else goes first.
Oh, well, I have a question. Living out here in California, and you're mentioning that great service. Now, that's a state-supported service, right, between Jack London Station and Sacramento, the Capital Corridor. Is California one of the few that has that level of state support, or are there other states that have the promise of providing the support that Amtrak needs to expand service within their states?
Oh, that is a good question, Dr. Green. I mean, California is by far the biggest. So, I mean, those three, the three services that we have are three state-supported services in California. The Capital Corridor, San Joaquin, and the Pacific Surfliner are basically our three biggest in terms of ridership. Not surprising, being California is the biggest, most populous state. But our other 25 state-supported services, range in the amount, in their size and ridership. But and I should have, I guess, been clear. Most of the growth that I talked about out there, under the current rubric would be state-supported service that would operate under PREA 209. So they would require state support to make those come to pass. So in addition to the services in California that we just mentioned, I mean, the other places where there's some pretty good ridership, I mentioned, Hiawatha, but the Keystone service in Pennsylvania that runs from New York out to Harrisburg has got very significant ridership levels. And then our services with New York State, also the Empire service that runs up to Albany and then runs west from Albany to the western part of the state, again, is one of our biggest sets of services in terms of ridership. But they run the gamut. Our service that goes, the Heartland Flyer, that service goes from Dallas on up into Oklahoma, is one of our smaller ones, but very important to those states.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim, had you had a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you this, Dennis. The first question is, as an economist, I see the U.S. really going into a huge national deficit, debt structure. Whereas after the passage of the recent Tax Reform Act, there were projections by reputable economists, not me, that suggested we might hit $30 trillion deficit by 2030. Well, now there are reputable economists saying we could hit 40 trillion or more over the next 5 years to 6 years, principally because the debt's going. So unlike the railroad freight industry, you don't have access to financing capital. So this is, I see that actually is going to be the number one challenge. It's not a question, it's just an observation.
Mm-hmm.
But here is my
We'll
question.
have no shortage of challenges. Yes.
Yeah. But here is my interesting observation, because I've been approached by some of the freight railroads legal teams who are looking to defend themselves against Amtrak for on-time performance, particularly when you fall behind on a schedule and then they can't catch up. And so there's, as you know, legal jostling behind the scenes. And I'm looking at your two charts. The one was the reliability on-time performance monthly scale. And I'm looking and saying, well, gee, you're tucked in the 70% to 80% range, where you have a lot of cluster in that graph. This would be this one. I guess. No, I can't hold it up to the camera because
can't see it. Was that the on time versus customer satisfaction one?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
I think that one might have been a sample route, but
yes.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking that in terms that I'm saying, yeah, but the railroads overall are still operating even with the benefit of their so-called not precision and not quite scheduled railroading. They're operating in a percentage on-time delivery the day promised,
Mm-hmm.
not within an hour, in the 70% range. So you're doing about as good as they are, or actually better in terms of a daily delivery. And then I'm looking at this other graph that you had for just the long distance trains, where you're tugging around at a 50% range, where the trains are basically traveling 1 or 2 days. And I'm not quite sure how to approach that, other than to say, as a customer, I usually take 2 trips a year on a really long distance train, and I don't expect you to be on time. If I'm going from LA to Chicago,
Yes.
When I arrive in Chicago, I stay the night over and then fly in Southwest the next day back to Philadelphia, because I'm never sure I'm going to be able to make that. But I accept that as a cruise train trip for my wife and I when we take the bed run.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at these things and I'm saying, I'm not quite sure how, when you operate on an avoidable cost basis formula with the railroads for the right to the access, that you're ever going to get up into the 90% level when you're traveling on a foreign freight railroad, as long as that foreign freight railroad itself can't do much better than maybe a statistically 88% on time once they get their PSR model running. That's mathematically what they could do for their carload traffic. So this is really going to be, I think, a problem for Amtrak to wrestle with. So what's your observation to my comments there?
Yeah. So a few things, Jim. I mean, one, that there are people who go end to end on those long distance trains, but the vast majority of the people traveling on the trains are actually going a much shorter distance, only a couple hundred miles. So that's part of it. The other thing is, we actually do see a lot of ability when the effort is put in. We do see a lot of trains making significantly good on-time performance. So
What is the
I
best,
grant you,
what is
it's
the best benchmark though for somebody like Canadian National on their IC Illinois Central? They seem to do pretty well, whereas Norfolk Southern on the other end is way off the chart. What is the reasonable benchmark as you as an engineer think is at least achievable without further capital expenditure to figure out how to do it better?
Well, I mean, you cited the city of New Orleans. It actually has pretty good on-time performance, and being able to get to something like 80%, I think is doable.
So if you got an 85% range for a long distance operation that's running roughly 20 hours or more, that might be able the best you can do. Huh? Unless you had capital investment.
Where the best is, but I think that it is. We do see situations day by day, right? I mean, we're looking at the averages, right? But there are situations where we get the people there. With the partnership of our hosts are able to get the people there and figuring out, and we definitely see places where. And we do work with the hosts to try and identify these and see what we can work out. We see places where there's opportunity for us to collaboratively find solutions and get the trains through on time. So that, I would be hesitant to really put the upper bound on where we can get to, because I don't know that we've plumbed the depths of where we can really make it work.
Yeah, just one last observation to make you feel good, because I don't want to be beating up on Amtrak, because I actually use Amtrak. I think Lou Thompson said this very well. He said, Amtrak gets enough money from Congress to be at least provide a basic service, but not to be successful. And that's your fundamental problem, I think.
Jim, could I intervene with a short question? And that is, Dennis, do you see any chance that Congress will include any money for Amtrak as part of its airline relief bill?
Well,
is Amtrak and RPA working on that?
If it's, if there were an airline specific one, I don't know that we'd be in that. We certainly there are different versions, right, of relief bills that are being looked at. We have definitely been included, certainly in versions of the House bill, and we would expect and hope to be in a COVID relief bill. I know the airlines have their kind of doing their own run and their own attempt at getting aid. So, if they were successful at getting an airline only one, that would maybe not include us. But we're definitely engaged with making the case and making our needs known, so that we're hopeful of being included in a relief bill that will come along. Does that answer the question, Steve?
Yeah. But you have an airline background. The preceding president, well, the current president of Amtrak and the preceding one had airline backgrounds. Thought maybe connections with the airline committee, subcommittees on the Hill, that there might be some linkage there, because Amtrak, more than anything else, fits in with the airline relief bill. Same problem. No riders. You got to have money.
It is the same situation. Yep, that's for sure.
Well, thank you, Dennis. I think your presentation showed, as our population grows and highways become more congested, the gains in ridership could be substantial for passenger rail if PSR strategies lead to better on-time performance. So thank you very much. And I just in the aspects of keeping us on time, can we send you questions if we have any additional?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thank you. And Steve, you had a question?
John, may I invoke a 5-minute break time?
I think that sounds very doable and very good. So we'll take a 5-minute, and we'll only be off by about 10 minutes on this schedule then. So we'll be back in after. Thank you. Thanks
Thank you for having me.